Hello and welcome to Morgan Latif Presents Coaching You Through Crisis. I'm Sam Latif, co-founder and director of Morgan Latif and your host. And this week, my guest is Alexander Meyer auf der Heyde. Alexander actually started his career out as a research scientist before moving on to management consultancy, where he rose up the ranks to partner. And from that, he decided to move into industry. He took over the position of an executive VP with global scope at one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And it was at this stage that he sort of decided to then pursue his passion, which was coaching. Since that, he hasn't looked back. And as a coach, he focuses on executive presence, executive onboarding, intercultural communication, culture change, and in particular, empathetic leadership. And it's this topic that he wants to discuss with us today. So we have a great discussion on this in terms of how to really identify empathy and understand it in the context of leadership and how to use it most effectively. In the new normal that we're all facing, and given the social distancing that is due to take place with everybody, it's more important than ever on how to practice it, and again, how to really leverage that with our teams, regardless of where you are. So we hope you enjoy the conversation, and let's get into it. Alexander, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Sam, for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here.
So I know back in the corporate world, you were used to dealing with very complex problems. Now as a coach, you also help leaders deal with very complex problems. And again, what we are facing with this is probably one of, if not the most complex problem we've sort of seen in recent history. But firstly, on a personal note, how have you been dealing with this kind of situation around COVID, around the lockdown, and obviously what's to come?
Overall, I got used to it, right? So I have two kids. They have been home for homeschooling for, I think, now 8 weeks. I'm working from home, so the whole family is at home. But compared with other countries, Germany is still in the good situation that we were able to leave the house, right? So we were able to go out for a walk, to do sports outside. It's very different to what people in Spain, Italy, or France experience, which were really locked down at home. So I got used to it, but I have to say that I definitely look forward to the time when I can start to travel to see my clients again, because video conferences are nice, but I'm someone who always liked traveling, and in that perspective, and from that perspective, I'm quite restricted right now. But I don't want to complain too much. Overall, I think we got used to it, and we are dealing with it acceptably, I would say.
Yeah. Right. Any tips that you've kind of picked up from the homeschooling, dealing with the kids during this time, that for anybody that might be listening, going through a different stage of the lockdown, that you'd probably advise?
Well, patience, I think, right?
Yeah.
Because certainly what we notice, but that is something which other parents share most likely, is that the productivity levels at home are not the same as at school, I would assume. And maybe also the appreciation for the profession of a teacher has grown significantly, because it's very hard to be teacher to their own kids. It reminded me a little bit of the time when I was at school myself, and when my parents tried to teach me something which I, for whatever reason, missed at school or whatever. It's definitely not the easiest thing, and patience helps. At the same time, I think it's important, and this is what we also did, that we, whenever possible, allowed the kids to go outside, and we have a garden where they were able to play. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, having people walking outside helps. So getting some fresh air, as opposed to just being in the room and maybe in the worst case experiencing cabin fever.
Well, having a bit of outside room, I know even if it's a tiny bit, it's a bit of a luxury certainly nowadays. And as you said, with the patience, I think touching, totally related to the empathy topic that we're about to go into and that I mentioned in my intro. But before we go straight into that, I always like to ask the origin story of a coach, right? I've said it before that a lot of, many coaches have these very, impressive careers, but they decide to sort of either put that on hold or at least completely refocus themselves on being a coach and helping others in their professional and their personal life. So for you, what was it that made you want to become a coach in the first place?
Overall, there was a red thread in my career, which I think was working with people, directly with people, and also supporting them in their career development. So I started off my career as a microbiologist working in a research lab. And I found myself there working with computers, liquids, the DNA, you have it, right? So a lot of facts and non-human stuff.
Yeah.
And what I missed about this role is really interacting with people. That's the reason why I, after an MBA, went into management consulting, where I was able to combine my passion to deal with complex projects with another passion to be in touch and interaction with human beings, with people, my clients and my colleagues. And this is what I have been doing, dealing with people for many years, because I spent a significant part of my career in management consulting, growing up to a partner level. And latest, when I was at a product manager level,
Yeah.
I took accountability to support younger colleagues in their career development. This is where I, for the first time, got into something which is maybe comparable to a coaching situation. And when I then was partner, I certainly hired people, helped them develop. Then I moved from from a management consulting role into a global executive role at a leading pharmaceutical company, and they're responsible for a global business unit. In addition to leading people, I was also contributing to people development for the large multinational group I was working for. And this red thread, a passion for working with people and helping them, supporting them on their development, is what in the end made me switch careers again and becoming self-employed as an executive coach. And I have to say, after almost 4.5 years into this profession, I really have found what I like. It's what I like getting up for in the morning, and it's my passion.
Yeah, and having looked since, I know, your career is obviously used to be always managing obviously a large group of consultants in a very large organization, the complexity, and now the coaching, is a different direction. And I know how much you've sort of enjoyed it when we've talked before. And one of the particular specialties you have as a coach is on this topic and on this empathy and leadership topic. And I think that's also the topic that you wanted to talk to us about today. That's something that you work on a lot with the leaders that you work with as a coach. So sort of to start us off on that, I mean, people are obviously familiar with empathy, and the subject of empathy and leadership has also been talked a lot. But from your perspective, with your particular lens, firstly, talk us through what do you mean by empathy in the first place?
Sure. For me, empathy is someone's ability to be aware of, understand, relate to, and experience the feelings and thoughts of another individual, but without being in the same situation. So that I'm really able to feel what someone else has felt being in a different situation. This is what makes me empathetic, that I'm able to put myself in the shoes of another individual to really experience and feel what the other one has experienced.
And with that as well, I mean, we talk about what we all have that capability, right, to have that emotion, but how much of it is nature versus nurture? How much is it something that we can be working on regularly, and how much of it is just purely down to the individual?
Empathy is partially innate and partially can be developed. The reason why it's partly innate, among others, is the fact that there's the phenomenon of mirror neurons in our body, which allows us to sense and feel what other people sense. So you might have had the experience of all of a sudden yawning without being tired, just because you saw, consciously or unconsciously, someone else yawning. This is what your mirror neurons picked up in the other individual, which made you yawn. And this is why our body is equipped with the ability to sense what other people feel. So now there's a difference in terms of the expression, how strongly people can do that, and how trained people are in that. But there's a part which is innate, another part which can be further developed.
And you feel specifically that with this skill and that people develop, it sort of leads to more effective leadership. Why do you think that is then?
Well, there is research which has shown that that empathy is a significant lever for leadership effectiveness in the end, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm empathetic, I, for example, I'm very likely a better communicator, both in terms of tailoring my communication to my audience, but also in terms of sensing what my audience thinks while I'm speaking, while I'm interacting, while I'm standing there, maybe even not communicating. At the same time, another example, if as a leader, I'm there to motivate people, I certainly can best motivate people if I understand their state of minds, if I understand their concerns, their worries, what they have, which allows me to make my motivational comments or speech in a much better way. You know? Also, if there are team members which for whatever reason they are going through a hard time, having a personal burden at home, so because they experience some arguments with their partner, whatever, so, or because they feel completely overwhelmed by the tasks, the more empathetic I am as a leader, the better I can understand them, and therefore adapt my leadership style to them. Those are a couple of examples why increased empathy makes better leaders.
Yeah. And I would say also, I mean, there's there's constant change at a faster rate nowadays. So the ability to recognize how people react to those changes is, I would say, even more important. And I know that the overwhelming consensus is that empathy does lead to more effective leadership. But I wanted to understand your opinion on a few counter arguments that I've also found. It's not necessarily mine, just ones that I've sort of found from opinion pieces and certain articles. And one is, for example, that being more empathetic leads to the more emotional side of us making decisions and not the rational ones. And that could also be detrimental. What would you say against that argument?
I would say that it's actually true, because it depends on the situation when a leader should be more empathetic or less empathetic. If as a leader, I'm in a situation that I need to take a strategic decision, preparing the decision, doing the required analysis, and actually taking the decision should be done in a very rational way, obviously, in the best interest of the company. When I'm then getting into implementing a decision to further tailor my implementation approach, if, for example, if I'm working in a global company, it really also requires me to be empathetic to the different needs of people in a global organization. My implementation approach might require completely different communication in one country compared to the other one. This is where empathy all of a sudden comes more into play. Now, that's the reason why I say I agree with the argument you just said. So there are situations when a leader should be very empathetic. There are situations where someone needs to be rather acting on the sympathetic scale, and there are areas where he or she should rather act in a compassionate way. And now I've introduced in total 3 terms. Let's maybe also speak about the difference. Empathy, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that I'm able to feel what other people feel, or I can imagine what other people feel. If you tell me, for example, that you yesterday evening you banged your head against a cupboard, so I might feel the pain because either I had the same experience, or because due to empathy I can feel what you felt.
Right. Yeah.
On the other hand, sympathy means that I understand why someone is feeling, but I'm not necessarily feeling this myself. If, for example, someone tells me that a close relative passed away, which I didn't know, it's very unlikely that I will feel the grief of the individual because I didn't even know the individual. Certainly, however, I understand why there is grief in the individual who's telling me about that. So compassion, on the other hand, is to act on my insights from empathy or sympathy. So while empathy and sympathy help me to feel or understand why someone is feeling a certain way, compassion in the end helps me to alleviate. It helps me to get the individual from the situation into something better. And along the leadership journey in different situations, it's important to be able to avail of all the 3 of them, in addition to the fact that there might be situations when a very rational decision-making or rational behavior might be the best.
Yeah, and look, I know you've also worked, all over the world. You've lived in China. We also work with leaders across different nationalities in our particular line of work as well. And you see the kind of different cultural nuances. So what would you also recommend, as somebody that's worked with, again, multinational teams, when there are these cultural nuances and the ability to actually show compassion is interpreted differently in these different cultures, how would you recommend people being sensitive to that?
I think it's very important that if someone is not yet used to working in these different cultures, that you start with significant level of observing and trying to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there, as you mentioned, I worked in China, I lived and worked in India as well, and both countries are very different to my home culture, Germany.
Right.
And certainly I went through pitfalls myself, I had my learning experiences myself, but I think I was open enough to observe and try to understand before taking a call. Yeah, so when building empathy, on the one hand, it's very important that someone is aware of and willing to accept that emotions are part of the game, and that emotions can range from being very happy to being very sad. The full spectrum of emotions is there.
Yeah.
But to learn that, it's very important to be a good listener. And good listening involves non-judgmental activity. Yeah? So if I'm a good listener, I first would like to explore what someone is telling me and would like to understand the full context before taking any decision. That means that I need to get rid of my own biases, which might exist, and everybody has, if they are honest, biases, which might be due to the upbringing, due to the socialization, due to some prejudices, I don't know. In any case, if someone is a very good listener, he or she is able to get rid of those biases for the time of listening.
Mm-hmm.
And when getting into those different cultures which you have described, I think listening is very important, observing is very important, and this is what in the end helps someone to build empathy and also to act in an empathetic manner tailored to the situation in which he or she is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also one of the points that, I mean, I was going to ask about the how empathy exposes our biases, and you obviously cover that on how to also approach that. But one of the points in favor of obviously what you were mentioning was also I recently saw an interview with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and it was interesting to get your take because he said, you know, well, we all know what's happened with Microsoft stock over the last few years. It's been, you know, tremendous their performance. And he says it's down to empathy because empathy has allowed this culture of innovation to really flourish. What's your take on that? I mean, do you agree? Why do you think he finds that there is this link between empathy and innovation?
Well, empathy, in my view, is linked with innovation, although I haven't thought about this yet in this perspective, but just thinking about this now, yes, because empathy requires, as mentioned before, that I'm non-judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation might bring ideas which are very different to what is there, to what I think, and the more I'm non-judgmental in terms of accepting ideas which might be even crazy to me in the first moment, the more innovation will have a field to grow on. That's the reason why, yes, I'm convinced that what was said is right. Yeah, they belong together. They might support each other.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, you've had this again, also this career in the corporate world, in consulting, for example, which was again seen as very competitive, very male-dominated. And do you think that this is also there's a sea change now of people being kind of more aware of their kind of own kind of, in a way, not vulnerabilities, but I think being showing this empathy is certainly more accepted in industries that perhaps were more traditional, or perhaps that was not seen as in such a positive light as now. Do you think that there's a change in that overall now?
I see some small growing plants, right? It's still, in my view, in the fledgling stages.
Yeah.
There's not yet a wide acceptance that empathy is something which will bring all companies forward. I still know many companies that think that emotions and business don't belong together. Yet emotions are a significant part of empathy. And I know that there are many companies out there who are driven and managed in a very fact-focused manner. There's a larger number of companies who take this serious in a different way and who have programs running in terms of empathy, but I don't think that we can say yet that is something where there's a dominating belief that empathy in the end will help companies to develop further. At the same time, and you mentioned COVID in the introduction, I think, and this is something which is not only since we are experiencing the COVID crisis, but maybe also as a result of the increasing remote communication tools like what we are using today as well, a video conference, which in the end adds to higher empathy needs in the end. Because so if we speak about empathy, so how can we be empathetic? We can be empathetic by our eyes, by our ears, by our tactile senses, by shaking hands, whatever. But all senses which we have, which we can avail of, they add to the overall impression we get. The more we are moving away from face-to-face interaction, the more we can't avail of those senses, because it might be, in the end, if we focus on email communication only as an example, it might only be the written and read word. But that's the reason why I think, while there is an increasing number of companies who think that empathy is important, there's a global trend which works against it. And that's the reason why I think that companies and leaders, they should accept that empathy is a key, and that they should work on becoming more empathetic. Because leaders in today's world, and not only since COVID, I think COVID has just amplified the situation. They are subject to interacting with their people mainly over video conference, and maybe only phone or written email communication, which limits their way of understanding from physical interaction how people feel. And I've spoken with a client last week who proudly told me that now with all the video conferences, they have become much more efficient, because all meetings start on time and they finish on time after 30 minutes. And we get rid of all the time we spend or even waste at the coffee machine. In my view, this is completely wrong, because we are human beings, and human beings interact with relationships. And as long as we don't place the social interaction which we had at the coffee machine before within our video conference, we will lose out a significant part of human interaction. That's the reason why I see some uptake in terms of empathy. There's a significant trend going down of remote communication, which will negatively impact the empathy, which as a result requires, and this is my conviction, that leaders need to become more empathetic.
And I mean, you said like a lot of more people are obviously communicating in this way. I mean, in your experience with people that are managing, again, teams remotely, again, I know in consulting, this was already something that was being done years ago, but is there any particular recommendations, any Zoom tips you can give to leaders that have these kind of cross-functional, cross-regional teams, and how to ensure that they are showing that empathy and some of that compassion that you mentioned is important now?
If they manage international teams, I think first of all it's important to consider a little bit the cultural beliefs of the different geographies they work with. There are geographies where relationship plays a different or higher role than in other geographies. So I don't want to stereotype, but it's just a fact that between geographies there are differences. This means if I'm interacting with geographies where personal relationship plays a different role, they, in my view, on the one hand, should have any communication, if possible, by means of at least video conference. So even if they know how their people look like, they should switch on video. I heard people saying, I know how my people look like. It's the reason why I can go for phone communication, because I know how they look like. Yes, they might look different on this specific day because they feel good or bad. It's important to remember that. That's the reason why I say switch on your video. Even if the call is scheduled for 15 minutes only, put in the social part. Put in an honestly meant, how are you today? So, and look at people, how they react to this question. Look how they look at all, right? So are they looking happy? Are there any signs that something is wrong? I don't know. And then go through the intended outcome of the call, and towards the end, put in, again, some social sequence, if I might say so, because had this meeting happened in the office, the social parts would have happened as well. And this is a recommendation that with all the effectiveness and efficiency video conference can have, just don't miss the social parts, which are part of human interaction and good relationship building.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have completely underestimated the value of just, as you said, even if it's on a screen, of seeing somebody's face, right? I mean, our daily businesses, we're interviewing leaders all the time, and you know, you only get 50% from a phone call. I mean, if that, you know, there's so much more that you get when you interact with the person. You see how they communicate, the mannerisms, all that. So I think there's only now people are really starting to realize. So yeah, as you said, hopefully those are useful tips that people will take with them. And to close it off, I think, you know, I wanted to really give you the final word, because, you know, with this level of uncertainty that a lot of us are dealing with, a lot of challenges, new challenges that leaders are facing, obviously practicing empathy is going to be more important than ever. I know that it's something that you feel, but what would be your final recommendations in the context of empathy and leadership to leaders out there, with what is about to come in the next few months?
I would hope that more companies, maybe all of them, and more leaders, maybe all of them, they widely accept that and understand why empathy matters.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I, over many years, played music, and I played also in different orchestras.
Mhm.
For several instruments to play together in a harmonious way, they need to be tuned to each other.
Right.
Otherwise, it won't act and it won't sound harmoniously. At the same time, people playing in the orchestra, they will in the end become very frustrated because the result isn't good. And for me, there's a parallel between instruments playing in an orchestra or in a band and people working and interacting in a company, because both need to be tuned to each other, which requires empathy, because I
Right.
need to understand to which pitch a certain instrument is tuned, or translated into business, I need to understand what the individual needs of an individual are, so that I can relate to and adapt myself to the individual, that he or she understands me best, that I understand the individual best, and that we collaborate. So this is my hope, that more people get into this, and that we are able to work to the extent possible in tune.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's been a really insightful discussion on this. Hopefully people are going to be practicing. I mean, certainly everybody needs a dose of more empathy given what the situation is. And look, I appreciate your time, Alexander. It's been really, I said, insightful. And if people want to, you know, also reach out to you with any music tips, can they also do that as well?
Absolutely. And if you want to join in playing, they should just go for it. Yeah? I like improvising. That's the reason why they just should just show up.
Well, look, thanks again for your time, Alexander. Best of luck with everything that's going on. But, you know, hopefully with these tips, it's going to make things better. And, you know, I hope to see you again.
Thank you very much, Sam. I was delighted being here.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.